Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we head into our final segment of the day as we are previewing the seasons for every NFC West team. Yesterday we did the Arizona Cardinals, have them coming out at 8-9, and today we have the Los Angeles Rams, who last season were able to have a nice bounce back year considering how rough things seemed in 2022, that this Rams team has been a little bit of a roller coaster the past few seasons. They went all in for 2021, won the Super Bowl, felt the price of that a little bit in 2022, especially with a Matthew Stafford injury mixed in there to sort of take away even a good level of quarterback play. And then in 2023, I thought overall they were just able to overachieve in a number of different areas, with the fact that their defense really stepped up to a new level. The offensive line, which was a bit of a mess in 2022, they returned to play. The receiving core, Cooper Kupp, obviously, the star player for the Rams over the past decade or so, at least from a receiving standpoint. He's been dealing with injuries. In steps Puka Nacua for one of the best wide receiver rookie seasons of all time. So there were a lot of positives for the Rams last year. I do have some questions about whether or not are we fully confident that Matthew Stafford is going to continue to be the Stafford we've known for a decade plus, because last season, I thought, and especially given, like I just mentioned, the injury in 2022, that I'm a little iffy on where Stafford is at this point. I love Stafford. He's been one of my favorite quarterbacks, as long as I've been watching football from the 2010s. I don't think that he got enough credit for some of those seasons in Detroit, and I'm definitely not writing him off, but I do feel like there is a very real world that we start to see regression kick in with Matthew Stafford, who's headed into his age 36 season. And he's going to be, he's this season 36, turns 37 in February. But I don't know. I have some doubts with Stafford. Last year, you look at his stats, 15 games played. He had 3,965 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, the lowest completion percentage for him since 2014 at a pretty low mark in 62.6%, which isn't terrible by any means, but it's a step down in comparison to what we've seen as of late. Completion percentage, sometimes a little bit of an overrated stat anyways, so I don't want to harp on him too much for that. But I do feel like I'm definitely not penciling in Matthew Stafford as a lock to be, I don't know if he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL anymore. And I very much respect him, and I respect the offensive play calling of the Los Angeles Rams and Sean McVay, but I would not be shocked if we start to see some regression from Stafford this upcoming season. Now, you look at the remainder of the offense as well. I mean, similar to my questions about Matt Stafford, you're also looking at an aging Cooper Kupp, where Kupp, it feels like, it's really been the two standout years more than anything with him. He sort of just emerged onto the scenes in, 2021 was the really big year. 2019 as well. Those are the two standout seasons. The only two seasons he has over 1,000 receiving yards, which can be, a little bit picky there at that mark, considering Kupp has been dealing with injuries since then. And that is still a real conversation with him, as he's now a wide receiver headed into his age 31 season. So as much as you'd like to think, when he's healthy, he can always produce. Is he going to be healthy the entire year? I have some concerns with that. And outside of him, now luckily you have Puka Nacua stepping in to make up, some of the difference there, and had an extraordinary season last year. The rest of the wide receiver core is fine. Tutu Atwell has at least shown some flashes of being somebody who could be a slot receiver in the NFL. Obviously, very, very small, but he's fast and he can make plays. So, I mean, somebody that was sort of, the Rams were knocked down a little bit, I feel like, by a lot of media outlets when they made that pick back a few years ago. But I think Tutu Atwell's a fine contributor for them. Jordan Whittington, a wide receiver out of Texas that they just drafted in this past year's draft. I mean, anytime the Sean McVay gets his hands and, picks out a wide receiver, I'm going to at least pay attention to it and keep an eye on the name. I think they'll have a fine rushing game. I mean, this was a very good offense last year, top 10 in just about every statistic, and I think that Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp, like I'm talking about, injuries could maybe get in the way of that. But, I mean, I still think that they have good talent overall. The offensive line is solid. That was an issue for them in 2022. But that was sort of the priority, was upping the offensive line. They signed Jonah Jackson, former Pro Bowler with the Lions, to a new contract, 3 years, $51 million. They re-signed Kevin Dotson, who was an important part of their offensive line last season, a training camp acquisition in 2023, and ended up, being one of the go-to guards for them. I think it's just going to be a solid starting group. Alaric Jackson is going to be suspended for the first 2 games of the year, but a very nice left tackle there. As long as, last year was his breakout season, as long as he can continue to build on that. And then their 2023 second-round pick, Steve Avila, is taking over the center spot, where last year he started all 17 games at left guard. So a little bit of a change up there, but overall still personnel pretty good overall. But this defense is where you start to look at some of the losses, where you lose Aaron Donald, one of the greatest Rams in history, one of the greatest defensive players in history. You can sort of have that debate amongst yourself. I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say on that in the comments section. But Aaron Donald, massively decorated defensive tackle for the Rams, for sure to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He ends up retiring, so that's not something that you think you can just plug in the gaps a little bit to replace there. And then they also lost their defensive coordinator in Raheem Morris, who was a massive part of this Rams defense overachieving last season. And doesn't help as well the fact that he brought a couple of other assistants with him to Atlanta in Zach Robinson and Jimmy Lake. So the Rams, some significant turnover on the defensive side of the ball. And ultimately, again, the numbers weren't extraordinary last year, but this is a defense that people were sort of chalking up to be one of the worst in the league, and that's most certainly not what they were by the end of the season, because they had a lot of standout young defensive players, whether you want to look on the front line, talk about a Kobe Turner, a Byron Young in that front seven. In the secondary, Quentin Lake ended up being a nice development for you. I think that this is a very fine defense. Now, it's not spectacular. We just live reacted to the fact that they traded Ernest Jones, their leading tackler from 2023 as well. That is another pretty substantial loss, and I definitely don't feel great about their linebacking core. I like Byron Young. I like the selection of Jared Verse in the first round. I thought that was a steal, getting him at 19th overall. But Omar Spates and Christian Roseboom, that's pretty underwhelming to me. Now, that being said, it's a new system there defensively. I'm not sure exactly to what degree the Rams are going to try and switch things up after, Raheem Morris is out of there, and in steps, I believe it is Chris Shula. That is their defensive coordinator for this upcoming season. Somebody who has been with the Rams 7 years prior and has at least been in the building, that it's not like it's this entirely new situation, but that's a lot of losses to sort of try and make up for, and ultimately, I think it's a pretty mediocre group. Now, that being said, there was a lot of talk about what the Rams were going to do at the NFL draft. Sean McVay finally having a first-round pick, which felt like, obviously, they were sending out a bunch of them in that deal for Matthew Stafford years ago. But There was a lot of talk about whether or not Sean McVay would look to get himself a new toy to play with, being the offensive mastermind that he is. But instead, Rams went defensive heavy in the draft, where they took 3 defensive players in the first 3 rounds. I believe in total, it was something like, I have the number here somewhere, 5 of their first 6 selections, I believe, were on the defensive side of the ball. I'm definitely a fan of the Florida State crew that they brought in the first 2 rounds, Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. So hopefully helping out that front line. They end up signing Tre'Davious White as a veteran presence, which could be a nice player to line up across from Darius Williams, who had a nice season for himself last year. So we'll see. Again, I think that there's definitely some mediocrity on the defensive side of the ball, and I with a changing in defensive coordinator, I'm just sort of iffy on that group as well. So looking at their schedule for the upcoming season, pretty middle of the pack in terms of strength of schedule, but what stands out to me is I think it's, a pretty good list of teams through those first 5 weeks. You are at Detroit for a playoff rematch. Matt Stafford going back to Detroit. We heard the boos last year. It ended up being an incredible game, but I think the Lions got better this offseason as well. They are then at Arizona, which yesterday I talked about. I think the Cardinals can be sneakier than people are giving them credit for. Then they're home against the 49ers, at Chicago, and versus Green Bay. That's a pretty tough slate to start the year. And then you get your bye week. So you could be sitting in a hole where I think it's conceivable that they could go 1-4, maybe 2-3 during that stretch. And then you get your bye week and you have a long season ahead. Now, I think it gets significantly easier from there, where you look at sort of that second 67% of the season for the Rams, and they're definitely in better positions, I would argue, with some of the difficulty of opposing teams, that you'll get a game. You still have both your games against the Seahawks. Those are going to be massively important, in my opinion, for the Rams to stay ahead in the division this year. You get home games against Miami and Philly, home game against Buffalo as well. Ultimately, I think that the schedule lightens up a lot in the second half of the season, and that's where it's going to start to be interesting. But I think this is an NFC West team or NFC West division that no team is a total rollover. I know that a lot of people aren't giving the Cardinals their respect right now, and I can understand the concerns why, but I'm just a little bit higher on them, and I'm just not as high on the Rams. I think it's a lot of turnover. It's a lot of production you're asking from some of your older players, and Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp and Tre'Davious White on the defensive side of the ball, losing your leading tackler, your defensive coordinator, some other key staff members, losing your defensive and locker room leader in Aaron Donald. So I think this year is going to be not a total letdown for the Rams, but I think it's going to be a little bit disappointing. I believe that Sharp Football Analysis has their over-under line at 8.5 wins, and I do have them going under that, and with a record of 7-10. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Again, I really respect Matt Stafford from, everything he's been able to give out throughout the course of his career. I'm also a huge believer in Sean McVay, the offensive mind, and I think that it's capable that he is, even despite some concerns, able to manufacture a good offense. I worry about that defense this year, though. And, maybe this is going to be a nice breakout spot for Chris Shula in this new role, but I think there's a lot of holes there that you're going to have to, get really good production from some young players. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Again, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you for all of our commenters throughout the show. Always appreciate having the interaction and getting to know what your guys' thoughts are as well. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back same time tomorrow at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.